Hello again and welcome back. With the financial system on the brink of collapse, many across the world say it's time to build a new financial world based on real business rather than greed and speculation. Now, one of those is the French President Nicolas Sarkozy. This is what he had to say in one of his speeches on the crisis.
L'autorégulation.
Self-regulation to sort out each problem, that's over. Not interventionism, that's over. The all-powerful market that it's always right, that's over. We must draw lessons from the crisis so that the crisis doesn't recur. We just came within a whisker of a catastrophe. The world came within a whisker of a catastrophe. We cannot take the risk of it happening again. If we want to reconstruct a reliable financial system, creating morality in financial capitalism is a priority.
Well, we're still joined by our guests in Rome, Stefano Micossi, in London, David Bjork, and in New York, and Michael Hudson. Mr. Hudson, if I could start with you. Creating morality in the financial system, that will have many people choking on their dinner, won't it?
It sounds like an oxymoron, and it also sounds as if all three of us are basically in agreement that the banks are broke. And if the banks are broke, and if they have negative equity, I don't see what governments or anyone else can do to make up the difference between the volume of savings deposits, which is high, and the volume of debt that can be paid, which is very low. The people can't pay the existing debts. The corporations can't, real estate can't. Now, the only way of solving a problem like this throughout history has been to write down the debts. And nobody's talking about, and that means writing down the savings. Because when you cancel a debt, one person's debt is another person's savings. I don't hear anyone in Europe or in America talking about writing down the savings and taking a loss. And for the government to try to make the savings whole is just creating money to compensate for negative equity that really can't work.
Let's just spin it forward a little bit and look to the future. President Sarkozy talked of the foundations of future capitalism being of the entrepreneur and not the speculator. Mr. Micossi, what do you think he meant by that precisely?
Well, I think some of the tones of this debate are there to pander, to reassure the public opinion, and there is a populist element there. I don't think there is serious discussion in Europe about setting out with another system or finding alternatives to capitalism. I think this is just language. I wouldn't overestimate it. What is serious is the fact that we continue to disagree on what to do, and basically the solution that came out of the Paris summit was, in the end, everyone on his own, but please, let's keep each other informed. This is not enough. And this is why markets are nervous. Now, it may be true that with present prices of assets, many banks have negative equity. Fair enough. But if the prices are too low because of a confidence crisis, and we can restore confidence, maybe prices will go higher, and some of the problem will go away. Please keep in mind that European banks were not in the main involved with the kind of scrap paper issuance and purchase to the extent of American investment banks. So there is a difference here that we should keep in mind.
Which brings us back to the original question, though, doesn't it? Because does it then remain possible for Europe, all the European countries, to agree, given the different cultures and different economic systems that they have within those countries? Mr. Bjork.
Well, unfortunately, I'm not the most objective person in the world when it comes to talking about the European Union. And let me apologise before that. I mean, from what has been said, it makes a lot of sense that those people part of the European Union, because they are committed to that culture, should do an awful lot more than just, making nice sound bites and, posturing, which is what happened in the Elysee Palace over the weekend, which is no good to man a beast. And if there is a way that that can be done, and he's absolutely correct, that the toxic debt that the European banks have owned is nothing like as bad as that in the United States of America. And I think it is crystallized and focused in certain areas, particularly with the hypo real estate, which is a domestic mortgage lender, very similar to a building society, such as the UK's had problems with two or three of theirs. Now, those, I think, have been accommodated. And as far as I'm personally concerned, I don't know for sure, but the banking system such as left in the United Kingdom, I would have thought was pretty solid. And if it wasn't, I would have thought there was plenty of scope and opportunity for mergers to take place, whether it's just within the United Kingdom or cross-frontier with other parts of the world. We're there in abundance to create some very powerful banks in the next 2 or 3 years.
Michael Hudson, one aspect of a potential new financial world order would be, perhaps some analysts are saying, the decline of the stock market altogether. Is that something that you could see?
Well, I want to talk about confidence for a moment that the other two people have spoken about. The word confidence in America has a much worse context than it does in Europe. Here we say a confidence man, a con man, is somebody who's trying to cheat you. And if you have confidence in the financial system for the last few months, you've been losing your money. Almost every day on the business channels here, they've talked about every market decline, say Lehman Brothers. It's going down another 10%, they call it a buying opportunity. Another 10% buying opportunity. The next day, it's bankrupt and you've lost your money. So the confidence is a psychological factor. The reality is financial. And if you look at the actual numbers, there's no way in which the numbers of the value of what people can pay, how much they earn, can actually be paid. In America, between 40 and 60% of many people's income go for the mortgage, the home ownership, 40%, and another 20% for interest charges. That doesn't leave any money at all to buy goods and services, so the result is debt deflation. People are not buying cars here. They're buying even fewer cars in Britain. So we're finally getting to the debt squeeze, debt deflation, and to have confidence going into a situation where people cannot afford to buy very much more is the surefire way of losing your money quickly, and it was confidence that produced the crisis to begin with.
And what's going to bring back that confidence, Mr. Mikosi?
Well, first let me note that the only savers who have lost money in Europe so far are those who held the Lehman paper. There's been so far no other major loss for savers and retail investors, which is not an irrelevant point. What to do to restore confidence? In my view, we have to restore a functioning wholesale market for banks, basic money market funds for banks. And in my view, the way to do it is to restore confidence between banks themselves. So today, banks don't trust each other because they know that they are, in the main, heavily undercapitalized, and no one is sure about how many losses are still hidden in their balance sheets. So the key point is, by recapitalizing with a joint operation major banks that were cross-border, we can perhaps restore confidence between banks themselves. And this scheme is not too complicated. It is sufficient for the large banks, for the large countries to agree. You can have the European Investment Bank, for instance, issue bonds guaranteed by governments to buy preference shares or warrants in the capital of banks. An easy scheme can be done under present rules within 6 weeks.
In your country, Silvio Berlusconi has said that we'll work with all major economies to rebuild the international banking system. I'd like to put this point to Mr. Buick. It really isn't as straightforward as that, though, is it?
No. I mean, I wish it was. But I think, from what I gather from the, from the lion's share we've got from the United States, from a highly intelligent person, Mr. Hudson, defeatism. Unfortunately, over here in Europe and the United Kingdom, we can't afford that. So we have to seek some sort of, answer and solution to the problem without actually creating anarchy. Just to let the banks, because of indiscretions from politicians and other people, to just say, well, that's it, and let them all go to the wall, is just unthinkable.
All right, let me just put that to, we're running out of time, so let me just put that to Mr. Hudson. You are accused of defeatism. What do you say to that?
I think that we call that realism here. What you're talking about in Europe is for the European governments to bail out the private sector losses. We would consider that crooked here, and there was an overwhelming objection by Americans to the political bailout plan. Voters said they don't want it. They don't believe that private money should bail out, that government money should bail out private losses. They think that the gamblers should lose. These banks took a gamble. Every banker I knew there was going to be a collapse. Their hope was to sell it to the Europeans. Their hope was to sell it to a sovereign wealth fund and leave some other person holding the bag for bad loans. So these guys knew the system didn't work. We call that realism. They thought they'd have time to sell it to the Europeans, and they sold a lot of junk to the Europeans, but they couldn't sell all the junk to the Europeans and Arabs and Japanese. So everybody was left with enough junk to create negative equity. That's the reality.
All right, Mr. Hudson, we'll have to leave it there. Gentlemen, we're right out of time. Stefano Makosi, Michael Hudson, and David Buick, thanks very much indeed for joining us. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We, of course, welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.